I'm Alexandra Reid, and today's session is called Rewiring Stress with Creativity. It's a wellness workshop for STEM women, so science, technology, engineering, and math. Subtitle is How to Reconnect, Reset, and Restore Through Visual Art. And this is inspired by the book Your Brain on Art, co-written by Ivy Ross and Susan Magsamen. So, welcome everyone. I am so glad you're here. If your brain feels overworked or your body feels tense, that is completely understandable. This session is your invitation to slow down and reconnect with yourself in a different way. So, one that doesn't rely on logic or problem solving. We're going to explore how visual art, even just simple marks on paper, can activate parts of your brain that reduce stress and help to restore clarity. So, no art skills are needed, just some curiosity. And think of this as a quiet reset, using creativity to rewire how you respond to stress. So, why are we here? STEM careers are full of pressure, but stress shouldn't be your baseline. And I want to stress that you don't have to think your way out of stress. So today we're going to explore how visual art changes your brain and helps you reset. So if you're like many women in STEM, you've been taught to handle stress by thinking harder, pushing through it. But research shows that stress isn't just in our minds, it's actually carried in our bodies and in our nervous system. So today is about learning how creative expression can help shift you out of that survival mode. And this isn't by adding another task, but it's offering you a sensory-based tool that you can return to at any time. We're here to make space for something simple, sustainable, and surprisingly effective. So no perfection required. Yeah. You don't need artistic skill, just curiosity and a pen. And, if this session speaks to you, I will tell you how you can take it further through a small group coaching program that I've designed to support your reset through more creative tools and some structured reflection. So, what the research shows, when you engage in visual art, multiple areas of your brain light up. So, not just those tied to creativity, but also those linked to emotion, memory, and reward. Studies show that even brief art making reduces cortisol and calms the amygdala, which is the brain's alarm system. And what's more, the default mode network, which is your brain's introspective hub, is activated, and this helps you feel more present and connected. So, this is why art doesn't just describe emotions, it actually helps to process and regulate them. And the best thing is that this effect actually increases with practice. So, drawing even just for a few minutes does help reduce cortisol and help support this brain body integration. But why do we find it so hard to de stress? We often try to manage stress with logic, but as I said, stress doesn't live in our thoughts, it lives in our bodies. And that's why thinking harder rarely brings us relief. Instead, we need to move to a way to move that stress out of our systems. Art offers a nonverbal sensory experience that can interrupt the stress cycle. It gives your nervous system a different pathway, one that invites play, rhythm, reflection. And this type of pause doesn't just feel good in the moment, it actually creates space for longer term recovery and insights. You know, why do we find it so hard to de stress? We're constantly solving problems, but as I said, the stress isn't just mental. The body is holding the stress, the tension, the shallow breath, the fatigue. Without an outlet, the stress stays stuck in our systems. And art is that physical, emotional, and also a cognitive release for this stress. So, why does art help? Art is powerful because it bypasses the need for language or logic. When you draw, you doodle, create freely, you activate emotional regulation pathways without needing to explain how you feel. And this opens up a deeper form of processing, one that often brings clarity and calm without conscious thought. It's not about producing something beautiful. It's about engaging your whole brain and you're inviting new neural connections, building a habit of returning to yourself through creative expression. You know, Drawing activates more of the brain than simple problem solving. You're able to express emotions without needing to name them. Visual art offers safety, some play, and new perspectives. And what happens is your nervous system actually resets from the inside out. So let's take a pause. Before we do anything else, I want to invite you to slow down, not just mentally, but physically. A creative pause like this helps shift your nervous system out of reaction mode and into reflection. It's a moment to check in without, needing to fix or explain anything. So when you pause with just, a pen in your hand, you're creating that bridge between your inner state and the page. And this is something that the brain recognizes as safe. It's the beginning of rewiring your stress, not with force, but with awareness. And before we talk about solutions, we need that space to feel. The visual art helps us slow down with, again, out needing to name, explain it. And taking this pause before we get into the activity is your entry point to starting to rewire the stress. It's about making some marks, not making judgments. So, how does creativity rewire stress? The brain responds to art the way it responds to touch, to music, to nature. It's actually a full body experience. When we create, even in simple ways, we light up the sensory networks that signal safety and curiosity. And that's what helps calm the stress response. Over time, this kind of activity supports neuroplasticity, and this is the brain's ability to change and adapt. So while it may look from the outside just drawing, what you're actually doing is forming new pathways, new neural pathways for resilience, for self-regulation, and emotional insight. So, art activates all these systems, the sensory, the emotional, the reward systems in the brain, and it helps to shift your nervous system from reactive to reflective. And even just 5 minutes of creative play helps to lower the stress hormones. You actually create a felt sense in your body of safety and calm. So now we're going to try something called the symbolic self-portrait. And this isn't about drawing your face or getting it right. It's about translating your inner experience, your inner feelings into lines, shapes, or colors. So you're drawing how you feel, not how you look. Think of it as a map of how you feel or how you want to feel right now. And, it can be patterns, lines, colors, abstract shapes, no judgment. Nobody else is going to see this. And you don't need to understand it as you go. Just stay with the process and let your pen move without judgment. This is a safe way to externalize what's internal, and your brain responds to that with a release of tension and focus. You're just translating your inner state to the external page. And again, you don't need anything fancy for this, just paper, pen, pencils. If you have a few colors nearby, that's better, but not essential. Markers, pastels, anything that actually, lights you up when you start using it. Paper, notebook. Yeah, what's important here is that you give yourself permission to play and explore. And, this activity isn't going to be graded, it isn't going to be shared, it's just for you. So it's the willingness to experiment. You don't need any prior art experience. This is a space where there's no pressure to perform. It's only to notice, to be observant, to be aware. Think of your materials as tools. These are not tests. There's no judging going on. The simplest marks can hold meaning when they come from a place of presence. And that's where that shift starts to happen. Okay, let's begin. So take a deep breath, settle into your seat, and I'm just going to guide you through this gently. You're going to draw a symbolic self-portrait. Again, not how you look, but how you feel or want to feel. You're going to use lines, textures, shapes, and there's no wrong way to do this. Let your hand move with curiosity. And as you draw, notice what you're feeling, not just emotionally, but physically. Stay connected to your breath. See how your hand is moving over the paper, thinking about or not thinking about the marks you're making. You know, Let your lines and shapes and color express what words can't. Just go with it intuitively and take your time. This is meant to be an activity for you. It's meant to be a space of reflection, not performance. So notice if anything has shifted. Maybe your breathing, maybe your posture, maybe your shoulders have dropped, maybe your neck is less tense. Maybe your thoughts have stopped racing. You're just focused on the paper and the pen and what's coming out onto the paper. Did you find your mind quiet a little bit? Did your body relax a little bit? Every small change is meaningful. These moments help us learn how art supports awareness. And the goal isn't to analyze what you made, but more to notice what it was like to make it. Does anything surprise you by doing this practice? That kind of noticing is a sign that your brain is engaging more fully in the present. And that's where the stress starts to dissolve. So, what did you notice? Did thoughts or feelings come up as you created? Were there any surprise in the marks or colors that you chose? Did your body feel different after creating, considering how you felt before? Insight often comes from the process, not the product. I don't want you to think about a finished good that you're making here. It's all about the process, the act of creating. So, what's happening in the brain while you're doing this? During this kind of creative activity, your brain shifts into a state that supports healing. Cortisol levels begin to drop. Your brain's reward system starts lighting up. The prefrontal cortex quiets down, so you're less self-critical. And at the same time, the default mode network turns on, which supports insight, memory, and emotional processing. So it's not just relaxation, it's actually a physiological change in how your body is holding and responding to stress. And that's just the power of just a few minutes of creative expression. Art making activates both hemispheres of the brain. It's supporting the neuroplasticity, which is your brain's ability to rewire these neural connections. Visual expression stimulates both the emotional and the reward systems. And the nice thing with doing the symbolic self-portraits is it builds up emotional insights without having to name it or put it into words. You don't need to be good at art. This practice works because of how it engages the brain and the body, not how it looks. In fact, the less pressure you put on the outcome, the final product or goods, the more your nervous system can soften. Skill isn't required. What matters is the act of doing it. Scribbles, shapes, patterns, they all count. The value's in the process, not the outcome. And research shows that creativity lowers stress regardless of skill level. From a total novice to an expert artist, the idea it's more about the process, the act of creativity. Abstract, symbolic, and imperfect art actually access deeper parts of the brain. So I want you to let go of good and notice how it feels to make something that reflects you. It's not about talent, it's about, tending to yourself in a different way that welcomes imperfection and just honors the process. It's about expression, not evaluation. So what you did just matters. You gave your brain a new pathway to process stress. In a world that rewards productivity, taking time to create might feel small or even indulgent, but what you did does matter. You gave your nervous system a new experience, slowing down, engaging your senses, and a chance to connect with your inner world. You created a safe container for emotion through marks and movement. And that shift, even if brief, is what begins to rewire how you experience stress. These moments build up, they create new patterns. This experience strengthens both your inner calm and your curiosity. Every time you create, you reinforce these new pathways. And, over time, they become part of your new baseline. So it's not just a reaction, but it's a choice you can intentionally return to. So this symbolic self-portrait is more than just, a one-time exercise. It's a creative tool in your toolkit that you can revisit. You can use it anytime. In moments of overwhelm, it can help you reconnect to calm. When words feel hard to explain, it offers you another language, a nonverbal language to work with. And it's flexible. The more you use it, the more responsive it becomes. So think of it as a way to check in with yourself without judgment. It's a quiet visual reset. Keep a pen and paper nearby. 5 minutes is enough. You can, repeat this practice with different prompts or moods. You can return to it again and again, and each time it may reveal something new to you. So, keep it in mind as your reset button, not your to-do list. Calm is a practice. We often expect calm to appear on demand, especially when things get overwhelming. But like any skill, calm deepens with practice. So every time you make a creative mark during a stressful moment or even a quiet one, you're strengthening those neural circuits that support regulation and resilience. Essentially, you can train your brain to return to calm more quickly, more easily. The more often you engage creatively, the more resilient your system becomes. So, calm isn't something you just find lying around. It's something you cultivate. These short resets aren't about fixing your day. They're more about reminding your nervous system what safety and rest feel like. Creative practices support emotional regulation over time. It does get easier over time, and your body learns to return to it more quickly. So, why repeat this practice? Repetition helps strengthen those neural pathways you just use. The benefits of creative expression are cumulative. The more often you return to it, even for just 5 minutes a day, the more familiar the brain becomes with this sense of ease. What starts as drawing actually becomes a ritual for calming. And over time, it creates new pathways for how you process emotion, how you recover from stress, how you connect with your own needs. Each creative session becomes easier and more impactful. So, repetition isn't just about routine for the sake of it, it's actually how you embed this tool into your daily life so that it's there when you actually really need it. It's how you rewire, not just how you relax. Over time, your body's going to learn how to shift from stress to creativity more automatically. It becomes a muscle memory. And this symbolic journaling is just one of many tools that can help you shift your state from being stressed to being calm. As you experiment, notice what works best. Maybe it's color for you. Maybe it's repetitive line work. Maybe it's just drawing while listening to music. Your calm toolbox doesn't have to be big. It just has to feel right for you. You may want to try mark making, doing color washes, or, sensory sketching. When we have tools that we trust, we're less likely to reach for overthinking or distraction. Instead, you start reaching for creativity, you start experimenting more. Definitely go with what feels good and low pressure to you. Let your creativity guide your regulation. There's a shift towards resilience, not just relaxation. So this is my approach to creative wellness. My work combines aspects of neuroscience, life coaching, and creative reflection. I work with women who are used to being in control and who rarely get the chance to just, simply listen to themselves. In our sessions, we use creative tools to bypass the mental noise and we tap into what our body actually already knows. So the result is that you feel more grounded, a bit more honest, and less alone in what you're carrying. I design this for women in STEM who have high responsibility roles. I like to combine drawing and metaphor and self-reflection, and it helps you reset, reclaim that energy and reconnects you to your creative mind. So what comes next? Now that you have a sense of what it's like to rewire stress for your brain, what does real relief look like? What if you had weekly support, more creative tools, and time to reflect without needing to overhaul your whole life? And that's what I've designed the 12-week creative reset program. It's about moving from survival mode into a sustainable reset. So over the 12 weeks, you build a creative toolkit for real stress relief. And it's part of being a small supportive group of women in STEM who also get it. We all know what it's like to carry the stress. And you don't have to carry the stress alone or wait for time for it to magically disappear. This is about making space for yourself bit by bit with, tools that I've designed to fit your life, your busy life. Each session helps you reconnect with what matters and helps you feel grounded again. And the best thing about peer support, it means you're no longer the only one trying to hold it all together. So the program creates some structure and some breathing room. And instead of trying to fix stress with solo efforts, you're going to work alongside others who understand the pressure of STEM careers. Each week you're going to try live coaching, reflective exercises, and use some creative activities to shift stress both physically and emotionally. And that power being seen and heard by others in similar shoes, similar situations is a reset all on its own. So what I find are the results aren't just personal, they ripple into your work. They give you more clarity, more focus, and help rebuild your confidence. Each session focuses on a different aspect of stress recovery, like boundaries, energy drains, perfectionism. We start with coaching tools, we add short creative exercises to process what comes up, and then we reflect and discuss as a group. The small group size creates some safety and trust. That gives you space to share, learn from the insights of others. And, some of the most powerful breakthroughs come from hearing someone else say what you've been feeling, but you didn't have the words for. So, why does the program work? It is backed by science. It's not just a feel good workshop, it is grounded in how your nervous system actually works. Creative coaching helps you regulate stress responses, integrate emotions, and rewire how you respond to overwhelm. You're going to gain real insights into your patterns, but you'll also practice doing things a bit differently with support. So the group structure adds a layer of consistency and motivation that's hard to do on your own. It's hard to manage on your own all the time. And you'll learn to reset in ways that are both gentle and effective. So it helps to complete the stress cycle. So, you don't stay stuck in that feeling of burnout. It's engaging both the brain and body through coaching and creativity. It's based on neuroscience, psychology, and nervous system regulation. And I've designed it for our real busy STEM careers. These are tools that fit your schedule. It's a small program by design. I'm only doing 10 women per intake. So it does mean space is limited, but that's also intentional. And definitely, if you're curious, feel free to reach out and either sign up through the link in chat, or you can book a free clarity call with me if you have further questions. And in that call, you get a taste of my coaching style, and we can talk through what support would serve you best. And you don't need to have it all figured out. This is just a willingness to try something different. The women who've done this work often say the biggest shift wasn't in how they felt, but in how they thought about themselves. They stopped apologizing for needing rest. They spoke up more at work. They reconnected with what made them feel alive again, and they didn't do it alone. Peer coaching adds depth. When somebody else reflects how you're feeling and how you're growing, it lands differently. It comes back to you. You feel seen. So this program gives you both the inner reset, but also the outer support to sustain it. And the clarity call isn't just an intake call. It is a chance to feel what this creative work is like. We'll look at how stress shows up for you. And during the session, you'll try a simple drawing or journaling tool during our call. And sometimes even just that one experience sparks a shift, a transformation, maybe an aha moment that, totally takes you by surprise. You'll also get to ask any questions about the group format, the weekly structure, or even whether it's a fit for your current needs or something you might want to do down the road. So think of it as a preview without commitment. And if you're feeling drawn to it, trust that instinct. It's worth exploring. You can apply through my website, mindartwellness.com, or just email me directly at coach@lexireidstudio.com. And you're going to leave with new insights and a better sense of whether this 12-week program is a good match for you. But I don't have time. This is the most common thing I hear, and I get it. When you're stressed out, you're burned out. The idea of adding something else just feels exhausting. But here's the truth. The stress won't go away by itself. It doesn't go away when your schedule clears or the project wraps up or you take that one lonely weekend off, because the stress is still in your body. You're carrying it with you. This program is designed for your stressed out self, not your ideal self. You don't have to carve out hours. Just give yourself 10 minutes a day. Let that be enough. If you're waiting for the perfect time to start feeling better, this could be it. Stress doesn't fix itself, but these small shifts do really make a big difference over time. It is cumulative. Small shifts do lead to big change. So that little drawing you made today, that's proof that your reset doesn't have to be dramatic to be meaningful. Small steps matter. And when you take them consistently with the right kind of support, change does become possible. That's what the 12-week program is all about, creating a series of small guided resets, that move you from just getting through the day, but actually feeling more like yourself again. And you don't have to do it alone. The support and structure are here when you're ready. Small insights, creative tools, and support, they all add up to having a real change. So before we close, just take a quiet moment to check in with yourself. What stood out to you today? What did you feel? Did anything surprise you? You don't need to analyze it. Just notice it. Just be aware. When you reflect with compassion instead of critique, you do create space for new awareness. And that awareness builds the foundation for change. You know, you've just rewired stress through creativity. You've made something that only you can make, and you've started that conversation with your inner self. And I want you to realize that is enough. Whether you made a messy scribble or something you want to frame, it's the act of making that matters. And that's how you come back to yourself through intention, attention, and small creative acts. So I want to thank you for being here, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. I know it takes effort to show up for something like this, especially when you're stretched super thin. And I do want to honor that. If there's one message I hope you're leaving with is that you're not broken, you're not failing, you're just a bit stressed out, and there is a way through that. The small shifts you made today, whether it was taking slow breath, making a line on a page, or just taking that moment to reflect, all of those things matter. They're not trivial. They are powerful because they are intentional. And, if you're ready, I'd love for you to join me in the 12-week Creative Reset program and take us a little bit further. But even if all you do today is just carry one insight forward from today, that's enough. And finally, please remember this. You don't have to do more to be worthy of rest. You already are. So take care of yourself. Reach out if you have questions and keep making space to believe. So thank you for being here.